A massive shout out to the Genin tier member of this channel. Thank you Ultear, your support means a lot. There's a rumor going around. If you like this video and subscribe you will be reborn as a slime, if you become a member you will gain all Rimuru Tempest's abilities. Hi guys, this is the next part of What If Natsu Was the Son of Acnologia. I hope you enjoy. By some miracle Wendy was able to pull herself, Charla and Panther Lily away from the fight that was about to begin. She didn't want to get caught in something like that. She could tell just by looking at Natsu's face that this Zancrow guy will be happy if he gets out of here alive, but it will be another miracle today if he does. Zancrow on the other hand didn't seem too worried about the whole thing. His crazy smile never leaving his face. So lizard. What's it gonna be? You getting killed by my hands or you running away? Natsu's eyebrow twitched. Run. You really think I gonna run from a weakling like you? Well, that at least made Zancrow's smile disappear. If only for a second. Who are you calling a weakling, you freak? Zancrow grinned as he watched Natsu let out a shaky breath. What, afraid already? Gonna cry. Zancrow blinked and Natsu was gone. His eyes widened and before he could even say something he heard whisper in his ear, "You misunderstood, that wasn't me trying not to cry, that was me trying not to tear you apart." Zancrow jumped and turned his head so fast you could hear his bones clicking. He saw Natsu standing there looking at him with dead eyes. "How did ya do that?" Zancrow asked with nervous smile. "I ran," Natsu said as his famous twisted grin found its way on his face making his scaly face looking even more creepy. Zancrow frowned and yelled, "Don't lie to me. Now feel the wrath of a god." Zancrow sucked air in his lungs, flame gods bellow. A torrent of black flames erupted from his mouth. Natsu jumped away from the flames on the nearby tree. The flames went only few centimeters from the tree and Natsu could feel the heat. Zancrow grinned, "Not bad. Now let's see how will you avoid this." Zancrow jumped toward Natsu and Natsu jumped at him. "Flame god scythe," Zancrow shouted as he formed a scythe of black flames off of one arm and swung it down at Natsu, who raised his right arm that was covered in scales. Black scythe hit Natsu's right arm making Zancrow's grin widen. His happiness didn't last long when his scythe that should have cut right off Natsu's hand just scratched his scales leaving tiny cut from where few drops of blood dripped. In his surprise Zancrow lowered his guard. Horrible mistake that Natsu waited. Natsu grinned and pushed magic in his feet pushing himself in midair above Zancrow's scythe catching him completely off guard as he found himself behind Zancrow yelling, "Chaos Dragon's Iron Fist." He hit Zancrow in head sending him crashing into the ground. Natsu landed gracefully few meters away from Zancrow who was lying in small crater. "OWW," he moaned as he rubbed the back of his head. God, that hurt. He wouldn't be too surprised if it actually cracked his skull. Had enough. A cold voice behind him made him jump. He wasn't sure what was in that voice that made his hair stand on end. Zancrow, despite the pain in his head, stood up and grinned, "Are you crazy? I didn't have this much fun in years." Natsu's face twisted into a smile, "Oh really? Shouldn't your attacks then be at least a little more powerful?" Zancrow scowled and growled, "Why you, try this." Flame God's explosive flame. He released a massive stream of black flames at Chaos Dragon from his arm by launching his arm forward in a punch-like motion. This time Natsu sucked in the air yelling, "Chaos Dragon roar." Natsu opened his mouth and released massive tornado of black and red energy. When the two attacks collided there was big explosion followed by bright black and red light. Explosion lifted the dirt in the air around few miles making it impossible to see anything as Natsu flew off the air landing on his feet few miles away from where he originally was. He made a step back sniffing off the air trying to find Zancrow. It didn't took him too long to find him moving in his direction. Obviously the dirt and air already lifted in that clearing where Zancrow landed, but here was different story. Tall trees shielded this part from wind as well as from sun, so right now Natsu was relying on his nose and ears. Sniffing the air for few more seconds he smelled something that made his heart miss a beat. Well, it would if he actually had a heart in this form. Master, he thought as his nose smelled unmissable metallic smell of blood mixed with purity and oak smell. Makarov's smell, blood, unmistakable. That was Makarov's blood. And there was a lot of it in the air. The dust lowered down on earth making it a little more visible. Enough visible for Natsu to see Makarov's small body lying motionlessly on the ground with big hole in his stomach. He needed help fast or he'll bleed to death. Natsu thought and looked around like he was expecting to see something that could help, or maybe someone. But then again, it was foolish for him to think that Wendy would already be here. Now that he thought about it, Zancrow should come to this place soon. Flame God's Kagutsuchi. Sudden yell made Natsu jump to the side, barely avoiding massive tornado of hot black flames that actually burned him this time. He looked at his left hand that was pretty badly burned inside. Another scar in the collection, yippee, he thought sarcastically. His eyes moved to laughing figure on the tree. Aren't so tough anymore, huh? Zancrow said, holding his stomach and laughing his ass out. I must compliment you. Not many people actually were able to scar me, Natsu said in cold voice that didn't give any sign that he felt any kind of pain. Well, the truth is he really didn't feel anything. Natsu's face became emotionless as he watched Zancrow jumping in the air yelling, Flame God's Bellow. Natsu held out his right arm and said in calm voice, Dragon Slayer Lost Art. Black hole. In his outstretched hand appeared black ball that looked like whole universe was in it, yet it was palm-sized. Zancrow's attack was just sucked in like it was nothing and black ball disappeared. Zancrow stared at Natsu with wide and fearful eyes. How do you know the technique? Black hole is spell of Shadow God. Natsu smirked. I had privilege to see God Shadow using it, so I adjusted it for my chaos magic. Zancrow gaped in shock. This man, no monster, turned God Slayer spell into his own. He knew that Master Hades once tried to do something similar, but he never succeeded. To think this little pipsqueak did something like this was truly astonishing. He was fighting against someone able to do something not even Master Hades was able to do. He was starting to doubt that he'll win this fight. But sure, it's not near as powerful as God's, Natsu said with twisted grin. Monster, Zancrow said, shocked. Natsu frowned as he jumped and muttered something under his breath, his fury glowing in his eyes. Zancrow didn't have time to dodge because he was frozen in shock. Natsu's nails turned into the claws and something started dripping from the claws as he hit Zancrow directly in his head. Zancrow hit the ground. He shook his head, trying to get rid of sudden dizziness and headache as he slowly stood up, looking at Natsu, who was grinning like madman. Zancrow looked at Natsu closer. Something was off about him. He froze when he saw Dragon's eyes that glowed red. Bony wings were growing on his back. Bony tail, just like the wings without any flesh or skin, trailed behind him. Zancrow's eyes widened in horror when skin on Natsu's face started to peel off it, leaving only bloody flesh behind it. In front of Zancrow's eyes, the teenager's skin started to peel off his entire body, and soon after the skin flesh followed, leaving only bloody skeleton that somehow still looked like it was grinning. Skeleton's teeth were all sharp and dragon-like, and his eyes, that were still there, were glowing even more brightly. Blood flowed down Skeleton's face like tears. Natsu's skeleton head tilted to the side, making it look even more scarier than it was, if that was even possible. Are you afraid? Dragon-like Skeleton asked in mocking voice. When Skeleton opened its mouth, thick trail of blood came out of its mouth. Zancrow was frozen in fear. Not able to speak, to move, to think. Bony creature made few slow steps toward Zancrow. Run! Zancrow screamed in his head, trying to move his body but without success. His body just didn't want to listen. With every second creature moved closer, Zancrow's eyes grew wider. When Skeleton was close enough to touch him, it raised its clawed yet bony hand and touched Zancrow's forehead with thin finger. Sudden pain rushed through Zancrow's body. His hands started to hurt so much. Too much, like someone was skinning him alive. His eyes looked at his shaky hands, and to his horror the skin was already falling off them. He looked at Skeleton that was still right in front of him. Please, make this stop, Zancrow said, clenched teeth, trying not to cry out in pain. Skeleton just titled its head again, sounding a little disappointed at the man's request, but now we'll be the same. Wendy was sitting behind the tree. She saw Natsu's last attack and she immediately recognized it. It was the same attack he used to defeat Guildarts 2.0, Dragon Slayer Secret Art, Demon Lord, Nightmare Awakened. She was actually surprised to see him using that spell, since he can use it only when he's in his demon form, but she guessed that Ha was able to use it because of those scales on his right side. She watched Natsu as he looked at Zancrow with cold eyes, his face matching them. When Zancrow started screaming like he was in pain, she had to cover her ears. The screams were so loud. She looked at Zancrow and her eyes widened in horror and shock as Zancrow tore his own skin from his flesh. What on earthland did Natsu made him dream? Natsu just stood there looking at the man with a motionless face. After few more seconds, Zancrow ripped his own heart from his body, leaving him in bloody unrecognizable pile of flesh and bones. Dragon Slayer Secret Art. Element Takeover. Earth Master. His eyes shined brown and he made motion with his hands and earth opened, swallowing Zancrow's body before it closed again. Without another word, Natsu walked towards still lying master. He truly hoped that old man wasn't dead. Even though he would never admit it, he truly cared for the old geezer. Wendy followed her brother direction with her eyes and almost fainted when she saw master lying on the ground in his own pool of blood. Natsu knelt down by the old man and put 2 fingers on Makarov's neck, trying to find a pulse. He almost jumped when he heard Makarov speaking, "Don't bury me too." Natsu smiled at the old man before he registered what he just said. "You saw what I did?" Natsu asked quietly. Makarov nodded before coughing. "I don't know what spell did you use, tough. ... We need something to patch you up," looking around like he'll find some bandages in the woods. Well, he didn't find bandages, but that blue-haired girl that slowly walked toward them will be even better. Of course, if she can even use her magic right now, since she was barely walking with Lily and Charla helping her. Natsu stood up, ran toward her and picked her up before she could say anything. He put her down next to Makarov, showing her his wound. "Do you have enough magic to heal him?" Natsu asked almost hopefully. Wendy gasped seeing the wound but then started crying, and no, she choked out between sobs. Charla was now crying as well and Lily was just looking in the ground quietly. "I'm sob useless," Wendy cried out. Makarov smiled weakly at a girl he considered his own daughter or granddaughter. "You're not useless, Wendy. You are very strong, and cough in the end, we all have to die sometimes." Wendy could only cry. She never felt so useless. Not even when Natsu was in dragon fiction process. Charla was hugging her, trying to comfort her, even tough she was crying herself. Lily just kept staring with disbelief in his eyes. Silence filled with sobs was broken when light chuckle escaped Natsu's lips. Everybody looked at Natsu confused, even Makarov turned his head looking at Natsu with blurry sight that was slowly fading. Charla was more furious than confused at his actions. "Are you lost your mind?" Exclamation mark. "How can you be laughing in the time like this? Don't you care at all?" Exclamation mark. "I really start thinking that you aren't heartless monster, but it seems I was WRO." She stopped when she looked at him. She immediately regretted what she said when she saw his eyes. That eyes she saw for the first time in her life. Eyes that looked more human like this than ever before. Eyes that had sadness in them, deep sadness that seemed to take over whole his face. Pain that was so deep and regret that shouldn't be in the eyes of someone who had only 18 years. "And Natsu?" Makarov asked weakly, thinking he started hallucinating. "Why in hell are you talking about death when nobody is going to die today?" Natsu said, looking at Makarov with weak smile. But Natsu sob, "I don't." Wendy started but never finished. "I don't care what will happen to me, but you are not going to die. Is that clear?" Natsu asked, looking at Makarov. Second later they could feel him gathering his magic. "What are you doing?" Lily asked shakily. "Well, try to imagine fairy tale without this old fart. That just don't sit right with me," Natsu said with small chuckle. Despite the situation, Wendy smiled weakly. Natus rarely joked about anything, and, wait a minute, Natus never joked. Something was wrong. Natsu's next words confirmed that. "Dragon Slayer Forbidden Art. Life Drainer. Death Door." He put his arms above Makarov's small body. Wendy watched with wide eyes how Makarov's wound slowly closed in front of her eyes. A strong cough brought her attention back to Natsu. Her eyes wide. Natus's hands started to shake, but he didn't remove them from their position above Makarov's body. He started coughing, blood and color from his face disappeared completely, leaving him pale as ghost. Dark circles appeared under his eyes like he didn't slept for months. Only when Makarov's wound was completely closed did Natsu remove his hands. His eyes closing as he started falling back. The last thing he saw was Wendy's mouth opening and closing and tears going down her face. "She's probably yelling my name," he thought and whispered, "Don't cry. Natsu, Natsu, Natsu." Wendy kept yelling his name when his eyes started closing. Her eyes burned with hot tears that started flowing down her cheeks. She almost missed when soft whisper escaped Natsu's lips. "Don't cry." She hugged his limp body that always was cold like ice, but now it just worried her further. "What did he do?" Lily asked no one in particularity and was actually surprised when he heard an answer. "He healed my wounds, but the problem is, he didn't use magic," Makarov said as he sat up completely unscratched. Charla looked at Master with relief. "Master, you're okay." Then she registered what he just said. "What do you mean he didn't use magic?" "Then how?" Makarov cut her off, knowing what she'll ask. "He used." Makarov closed his eyes in grief. "His life force." Lily looked at him worried and confused. "And that means?" "You see, once a wizard spent all her magic she will recover it in relatively short time. But once a wizard spent all her life force heal." Makarov looked at Natsu and let out a sob. Lily and Charla gasped. Wendy didn't listen what they were talking. She just stopped hugging Natsu and put his head gently in her lap, looking at his pale face and small trail of blood that was flowing down his chin from his mouth. "But he healed you, isn't that the same magic Wendy uses?" Charla asked. Master. "Well, yes and no. In basics it is the same, and his healing could actually heal much faster and much greater wounds. Even recreate a lost limb, but it also comes with much greater price. Depends about the wounds. He needs to give that much of his life force as close to the death as the wounded one. In other words, he gives his life force to the wounded, putting Natsu in near-death state and wounded in completely healed and alive state." Charla, Lily and Wendy gasped. Wendy heard last part what Makarov said and started crying even harder. Right now Natsu gave almost everything of his life force. It will recover, however I don't know how long it will take him to recover even a small fraction of it. Back in camp, Lizana and Mira were just cleaning the table in the camp when they saw red fireworks. "Enemy?" Lizana asked, surprised. Mira frowned and looked from where fireworks just came from. Urza just went there half an hour before. She turned her head to the happy who stopped eating his fish, looking at fireworks. "It's been over an hour since Natsu left too." Happy. "Go, find Urza and find out what's going on," Mira said, and Happy quickly put last bite of fish in his mouth before yelling, "Aye," and flying into the woods. "Lizana, get ready to fight." "We don't know how close they are," Mira said, and Lizana nodded. They prepared their magic. The feeling of boiling magic in their veins and magic gathering around them filled the air. There was silence for around 5 minutes, and then, boom, air around sisters exploded, sending them flying. "Ah!" they yelled in surprise more than pain. Lizana landed with one knee on ground and Mira landed on her feet in crouch position. "Who's there?" Mira yelled angrily. She slowly stood up and looked around, but no one was there. "Look here," a voice said from a tree. Mira and Lizana looked at the tree only to watch with wide eyes as a figure emerged from a tree. "Who are you?" Lizana asked. "Call me Azuma," Azuma said with smirk. "Prepare for fight, Lizana," Mira said, and Lizana nodded. Azuma raised his hand and air exploded again, but this time sisters jumped out of the way. "Sister, use Satan's soul," Lizana yelled as she transformed into her tiger soul. "I can't use it over and over again," Mira said. Azuma raised his eyebrow. "Sister, don't tell me you're Demon Mira Jane." Mira glared at Azuma. "That's an old name, but better be careful. When Mira gets serious, she's crazy strong." Lizana yelled at Azuma and was about to attack him. "Oh, I see." Azuma made some hand sign and from earth shoot trees and warped around Lizana, making it impossible to move for her. She transformed back to her normal form. A number 180 appeared in front of Lizana as it's some kind of watch, and it started counting down. "Lizana," Mira yelled as she tried to free her sister. "I can't move," Lizana said. "I want to fight the demon. If you don't defeat me, Mira Jane, your sister will be blown to pieces in less than 3 minutes, Azuma said. "You coward," Mira yelled in fury. "To fight with that demon, I'll do anything," Azuma replied. In blink of an eye, Mira transformed in her Satan soul and flew toward Azuma. She flied over another explosion that Azuma made and crashed her foot in Azuma's stomach. "It doesn't look good. I don't have enough magic to use this for too long," Mira thought, "but I have no choice." "Go," Azuma moaned as he came crashing into the tree. He soon stood up with grin. "This is it. This feeling. It's the best," he yelled as Mira sent another kick in his head, sending him flying again. He flipped in midair and raised his hand, catching Mira off guard as air around her exploded again, sending her flying backwards. "Ugh!" Mira cried out in pain. Mira took a glance at Lizana, who noticed it. "Mira, don't worry about me. Concentrate." It took all Mira's willpower to concentrate at Azuma when number on clock in front of Lizana was already on 113. Azuma used distraction and sent another round of trees that caught Mira's arms and legs. Mira struggled to break free but without success. Chain burst. Azuma yelled the spell as trees around Mira exploded. Luckily she was fast enough and break free just in time to escape the explosion. She flied straight toward Azuma as she withdrew her fist, readying it for a punch that she sent straight in Azuma's face. Unfortunately Azuma dodged the punch. "Release my sister," Mira yelled, readying another spell. "Strong. Very strong. It's been a while since I had this much fun," Azuma said with smirk. Her eyes glanced at Lizana again. Clock was already on 62. Azuma used the distraction again and with motion of his hand trees rose from the ground again, striking Mira and sending her flying. "What are you looking away for?" Azuma asked. "Ah," Mira yelled in pain. "Burst claw," Azuma yelled. Explosion hit Mira, but she was able to compose herself before she crashed down. Soul extinction. She sent her spell at Azuma and it exploded, destroying everything in her path. When explosion died down to Mira's shock and horror, Azuma was able to protect himself with his ability to control wood. On Lizana's watch was already 24. "I expected no less from you, Mira Jane. Let's enjoy this a bit more." Mira glanced at clock. 19. She squeezed her eyes before reopening them and flying toward Lizana. "Mira," Lizana yelled. "What are you doing?" Azuma yelled furiously. "It's futile. It won't unlock unless you defeat me," Azuma yelled at Mira, who was desperately trying to free her sister. "You don't have much time left. Show me how much serious you can get." "Sorry," Mira said as her Satan soul disappeared. She hugged Lizana. "I don't have enough power to defeat this guy right now, eh?" Lizana asked, confused. "It's impossible for me right now," Mira said softly to Lizana. "Mira," Lizana said, "but I believe that there is someone in the guild who can." She smiled weakly at Lizana. "What? Are you talking about, Mira?" Lizana asked, crying. "So? Your sister is going to forfeit here, but," Mira said to Lizana. "You don't need to worry." Clock showed 1. Azuma could only stare wide-eyed at two sisters. "Lizana, you're the one person I won't let die again," Mira said. "Mira a. Lizana's yell was silenced by the sound of the explosion that destroyed whole section of the forest. Explosion died down and dust cleared. Lizana could only stare with wide eyes in front of herself. Mira was lying on her, unmoving. Lizana slowly moved her sister from herself. "Mira," Lizana asked, looking at her sister's face. Azuma walked away. "Mira, no. You have to wake up. Hey, wake up." Tears went down her face. "Mira. Come on. You know what will happen if you don't wake up." Lizana sobbed. "I'll cry, then Elfman will cry, entire guild will be sad, and you know what Wendy said will happen to Natsu if you die." Azuma stopped in his tracks to hear what will Strauss' sister say. That pink-haired dragon was on completely different level than anyone else. "He'll die too, you know, so Wendy will have to cry over him too." Lizana knew she was babbling, but she couldn't think of anything else to say. "Come on, Mira. Wake up." Azuma started walking again. Somewhere else in the forest asterisk. Finally, purple-haired woman said, "My dream will come true." Woman smiled softly. "Once I have my hands on Zeref, I will be saved." Leaves rustled behind her. "Who's there?" she asked as she turned around quickly. "Looking for me," answered a voice. Woman's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Zeref." When she saw the man she froze. "I see, so you are the peoples that disturb my peace." She started shaking. "Those eyes. It's sad," said Zeref, "how you've managed to anger me." Zeref growled as his eyes glowed crimson. "Why isn't this working?" Wendy yelled in frustration. Her hands glowed with weak green light. She was still low on magic and she knew she didn't have enough magic to do much, just like he didn't have enough to help heal her master. And she hated being so damn helpless. "Wendy, you should stop," Charla said quietly. "No, I can't. I just can't," Wendy said, shaking her head. Makarov stood beside Wendy, looking at her useless attempts to wake up Natsu. She was kneeling beside Natsu's body, trying to get some life energy back in his body. He was quite surprised when she said that she could force his life force to restore faster. She did something like that to bring Jalal back from almost death state in Oracion Cease arc in manga. But the problem was she needed almost all her magic to do that, and right now she barely had any of it. Not to mention that for some reason she wasn't able to do anything. She couldn't heal even small cut, and she should still be able to do that. Makarov looked at Natsu's body. His eyes were still closed. Dark bags under his eyes seemed to get even darker. Even though he was as cold as ever, there was sweat on his forehead like he had a fever or something. Not to mention how pale he still was, and that just helped to emphasize those black scales that were on right side of his body. Wait a second. Wendy, concentrate on those scales and try to remove them first. Makarov said, hoping he find the answer to why Wendy's magic didn't work. She didn't question his reasons, believing her master knows what he's doing. Charla and Lily on the other hand wanted to know why he would said such a thing. Charla voiced their thoughts. Why do you think that would help, master? Small man frowned while speaking. It is clear to me that those scales were work of dark magic. He was exposed somewhere to dark magic and it most likely affected his demon form. So if I'm not mistaken, Wendy's magic should help remove it since she uses pure magic. Lily and Charla nodded at explanation. In newly restored camp, Lizana was kneeling next to her sister, who was still unconscious but surely alive. She looked around. Mira, Elfman, Evergreen, Gajil. They were all lying there in the makeshift bed. Gajil and Levi were the first one to fight the enemy. Gajil barely defeated them while Levi ran away to find help. She was found later by Urza and Juvia, and that was the moment those red fireworks have been fired by Urza. Levi stood beside her. In the moment her eyes looked on Gajil's chests that were slowly rising and falling. Evergreen and Elfman fought against some weird guy named Rustyros, who was part of Grimoire's 7 kin of Purgatory. They lost and were hurt pretty badly, but Elfman was able to carry Evergreen all the way back to the camp. They'll be alright, Levi said quietly. Lizana looked up to her and smiled weakly. Yeah, I guess you're right. Then she looked back at Mira and her lips trembled, but still. They are so strong. Sister and brother were defeated. Gajil too. Levi put a hand on her shoulder, making her stop as she looked up at Levi. You don't have to worry so much. Don't forget about Urza, Kana, Lucy, Juvia, Wendy, Lily, Charla, Happy, Master and Natsu. They are still out there kicking enemies, but, I mean, think about it. We have Dragon at our side, Levi said, and Lizana smiled at her friend. A rustle behind them made them tense up as both of them quickly turned and took battle stance. Levi prepared her magic pencil, ready to do everything she can to protect her fellow guild members. Scratch Natsu from that list, came a familiar voice that belonged to no one else than their master. He came walking from the forest with Panther Lily carrying Wendy in his battle form. Charla was walking slowly behind. Their eyes widened when they saw who was master carrying. He was using his Titan magic, so he was big enough to put Natsu's human body on his back. They immediately noticed that he was deadly pale, but they couldn't see anything that would cause him to be like this. There wasn't any wound on him and the only blood was coming from his mouth. Lizana started running toward them, thinking, if they were able to defeat Natsu, I don't think we have a chance at even scratching them. I just hope he's alright. Lizana took Wendy from Panther Lily, who returned to his smaller form. She then noticed that Wendy was still awake. Are you okay? Lizana asked worriedly. I'm fine. I just used too much magic, Wendy said. She smiled weakly, thinking, I'm glad I was able to remove those scales from Natsu's skin. He seems like he's already healing faster. Flashback. Wendy started using her magic to remove scales from Natsu's skin without question. Master and Exceeds watched her in expectation, hoping this'll work. Imagine their happiness when scales started to peel off of his skin, turning in ashes when they touched the ground. They all smiled as Wendy proceeded to remove all scales from his body. Flashback. Lizana nodded with relief. She then nodded toward Natsu. What happened to him? Wendy looked away, not wanting to meet her eyes. He used his life force to heal Master's wounds since I was too weak to do so myself. You are not weak, Wendy, Lizana said, frowning. Wendy's eyes filled with tears. But I. Lizana smiled warmly at her little friend as she laid her down on one of the beds. No, 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 she said, waving her finger like mother scolding her child. No crying. She smiled at Wendy again. Remember, you promised Natsu you would not. Wendy wiped away her tears and smiled back. Natsu was lying in the bed next to hers. You could barely see his chest rising and falling. You should rest too, Wendy, Lizana said, and Wendy only nodded before she laid her head down and fall in restless sleep. She didn't want resting when her friends were out there fighting, but she didn't have choice. Charla was sitting next to Wendy. She suddenly tensed up. In front of her eyes appeared pictures. Blood, smoke, a dragon, a black dragon that looked like Natsu, but he had blue lines instead of red ones. He was preparing to unleash his roar. Black wing covered her sight of the dragon. Then, bright light before everything was consumed by darkness. Suddenly she could see normally again. Lily was standing in front of her with worried expression. "Are you alright? You started shaking all of a sudden," he asked, and Charla nodded. She was still shaking a little. She had visions of future before. She truly hoped that this was just some kind of nightmare even though she was awake. "I'm fine," she said finally. Lily didn't seem too convinced but decided to drop it for now. With Ultear ***, Ultear groaned as she collided with the tree. Zeref walked toward her, his eyes still glowing red. "What do you want?" Zeref asked, appearing behind Ultear, kicking her in the back. "Ah," she cried in pain. "How can I be thrown around so easily? I know he's Zeref, but I'm one of the 7 kin. So how?" she yelled inside her head. "You want my power?" Zeref asked calmly. He walked toward Ultear, who just started getting back to her feet. She looked him in the eyes, and just when she was about to use her own attack, Zeref raised his magical pressure, making it hard to breathe. She gasped in surprise and fell on her knees. "Or maybe you want my brother?" Zeref growled. Magic started leaking around him. "Brother?" Ultear thought as her eyes widened in surprise and fear. "With Lucy and Kana ***, that stupid goat." Lucy groaned as she got back to her feet. "Yay. No kidding," Kana said with annoyed tone. In front of them was white human-like goat in black suit. "What are they even looking for?" Lucy said as she draw one of her key. "Heck if I know," Kana said as she take few cards in her hands. "What are we looking for, you ask?" Goat said. "Not what, who?" Kana and Lucy narrowed their eyes. "You maybe heard of him. His name is Zeref." Kana's and Lucy's eyes widened in surprise. Zeref, they said in union. With Ultear ***, Ultear was standing over Zeref's unconscious form. "You may be a legendary black mage, but in your sleeping state you're no match to me." Flashback ***, just before Zeref unleashed his final attack at kneeling Ultear, his glowing red eyes turned back to black. He stopped himself from using that spell and stumbled back, holding his head. Magical pressure that was holding her on the ground disappeared, and as soon as she felt that, she jumped on her feet. A sphere appeared floating above her hand. Not wasting the opportunity, she said, "Arc of time, flash forward." The sphere multiplied and flew toward Zeref, knocking him out. Then with swing of her hand, trees grew from the ground, binding Zeref. They warped around his wrists and ankles, holding him firmly. Flashback end ***, Ultear straightened herself, wiping blood from her lips. She looked at Zeref seriously. She then got crazy look in her eyes as she smiled, then chuckled before she started laughing like maniac. "I got him," she yelled enthusiastically. "I got Zeref." With Lucy and Kana ***, open, gate of the Golden Bull. Taurus. Lucy yelled as sound of the bell rang, trough the clearing where she and Kana fought against Goatman. "What can I do for you, my pretty lady?" Taurus asked with hearts in his eyes. Kana, hearing this, sweat dropped and Lucy face palmed herself. She then pointed at Goatman and said, "Just fight that goat over there." Taurus looked at where Lucy pointed and his eyes grew wide. "Capricorn." Lucy and Kana looked at him surprised. "You know him?" Kana asked. Before Taurus could say anything, a new voice said, "Yay. He's a celestial spirit, one of the Zodiac 12. The goat, Capricorn." Everybody turned to see Locke and Gray standing there. "Locke?" Kana asked, surprised to see him here. "He's one of the Zodiac." Lucy screamed. "Yay," Locke said, "and I would like you to leave this fight to me." "What? Why?" Gray asked. "He can use magic that decreases abilities of humans that are around him, but since I'm not human I don't have to worry about that." "Well, that explains why my attacks had so little effect on him," Kana muttered. "Lucy, go. I'll take care of this," Locke said, looking Lucy in the eyes. Lucy looked at him uncertainly. "We'll take care of this. You don't need to worry your beautiful booty." Taurus said. Lucy nodded and then said, "Okay, but you better come back to me." "No matter what." "Sure," Locke said and then looked at Taurus. "You should go with her." Taurus nodded before returning to Spirit World, waiting to be summoned. After that, Kana, Gray and Lucy ran, with Lucy taking one last glance at Locke. When Lucy and the others were out of sight, Locke said, "Regulus, give me power." Time skip with Lucy and others ***, they were running trough the forest when one of the Lucis keys glowed. She smiled happily. "Locke won," she said to the other two, who smiled as well. "That's great," Gray said. "We should split up and try to find others," Gray said after they ran for few minutes in silence. They stopped. Yay, you're right, Kana answered. I don't know, is that the best thing we should do right now? Lucy said worriedly. Yes, but we need to find enemies as quickly as possible, Gray said. Kana looked at her purse before taking out few cards with their pictures on it. Here, we can communicate with this until we meet again, she said. Great, Gray said. Then let's go, and with that they split up. With Lucy asterisk, it will be the best if I go first to the camp. They most likely put there those who were hurt, so I'll go help there if anything is needed. If not, then I'll just go and try to find Urza, or maybe. A picture of pink-haired teen that was tearing his enemies with his claws flashed before her eyes. She sweat dropped. Better Urza. With plan in her head she started running toward camp but was stopped when she heard something behind her. She quickly turned and her eyes widened comically when some giant, fat man was about to stomp on her. She jumped, barely avoiding it. Who the hell are you? She screamed. The next thing she saw made her almost falling on ground in disbelief. White-skinned giant was hiding behind a tree, shaking. Screaming won't get you anywhere. I'm one of the 7 kin of Grimoire Heart, Kane Hikaru. I'm really strong, you know, he said, still shaking. Lucy's sweat dropped. Yeaa, Lucy said sarcastically. Anyway, since you're from Dark Guild that threatens my family, I'll fight you, Lucy said. Oh, okay, Kane said. Now, behold. Kane reached inside his coat and took out a creepy-looking doll. Mr. Kersey, Kane yelled. Lucy's sweat dropped at the name. Now give me some of your hair, he yelled. Huh, no way, Lucy yelled, taking a step back. But Ushi no Kokumari an, name of his magic, needs some hair to work. Kane said. I'm not giving you my hair. Lucy yelled. Look, if I put some of your hair on this doll, Mr. Kersey, just as you expected, I'll be able to manipulate your movements. That's my ultra super cool deadly dark magic. After hearing that, I'm definitely not going to give you my hair. Lucy said. And besides, I'm sure you're bluffing. I never even heard of that magic before. If you don't believe me, then here, Kane said as he out one of his own hair on the doll's head. He handed her a doll. Lucy took the doll with blank expression. She swung the doll trough the air, and to her surprise Kane, following the doll's movements, fly trough the air. Ha ha ha, Lucy laughed. Wait a second, Kane said. Lucy's eyes flashed evilly as she smiled devilishly. I'm spending too much time with Natsu, she thought. Take this. Lucy said as she starched doll's legs. Ah, Kane screamed with anime tears running down his cheeks. Lucy made few more stretches before Kane yelled, that's enough. He took doll from Lucy's arms. Now I'm pissed. He started running, as did Lucy. Ah, she screamed as she ran. She jumped over a tree, and right when Kane was about to hit her, a tree flew in his head. Lucy looked to see where did the tree came from. Her eyes widened in fear when she saw a purple-haired woman standing on top of the tree with some man in her arms. Kane, the woman asked, surprised but quickly grew angry. Get out of my way. And with that the woman was gone. Lady Ultear, Kane yelled after the woman. That was another of the 7. Lucy thought. After Kane watched her leaving, he turned back to Lucy. They looked each other in the eyes before Lucy started running again. Ah, with Urza asterisk asterisk, puff, dot puff, dot puff. Urza tried to catch her breath. She just finished fighting that pink-haired girl Meredy, and now Juvia and Meredy were lying unconscious. To make things worse, this lunatic Azuma appeared. Requip, Urza said, preparing for the fight. Yes, yes, you are worthy opponent indeed. Azuma yelled with smile. Urza glared at him in her Heaven's Wheel armor. In camp asterisk, Levi and Lizana were talking about something. Makarov left to help his children, so right now only Lizana, Levi and Exceeds were here with injured. Sudden voice get them on their feet. Well, what do we have here? Gray-haired man said. Who are you? Lizana yelled as she took battle stance in between the man and her injured friends. My name is Rustyros, it's pleasure to meet you, Rustyros said, smiling. Lizana's eyes widened, as did Levi's. That's the man that defeated Elfman and Evergreen. Asterisk with Ultear asterisk asterisk, now I finally have Zeref. Ultear thought happily. She was carrying Zeref's unconscious form trough the forest. She put her finger of the arm that didn't hold Zeref on her chin, thinking out loud, and that brother he talked about. I didn't know Zeref has a brother. And if he's on this island. She smiled. I'm going to find him and take him with me as well, ha ha ha. Oh, God, You're so pathetic. You only scratched me, Rustyros said, laughing like maniac. He was standing above badly beaten Lizana and barely standing Levi. Lizana glared weakly at him. Only if Levi and I didn't get injured before. Now to finish you off, he said with evil smirk. Levi tensed as she waited for final blow. Arc of embodiment. He never finished as someone shouted behind him, get away from them. Rustyros turned around and Levi and Lizana looked up to see none other than Fried and Bixlow. Fried, Bixlow, Levi and Lizana said, finally something good happened. One and only babe, Bixlow said grinning. Are you alright? Fried asked, not moving his eyes from smiling Rustyros. We'll live, Lizana said weakly. Well then, get ready Bixlow, we are gonna make Ever proud. Fried said smiling. Magic filled the area as Fried and Bixlow prepared for fight. Let's go my babies, Bixlow said as his baby started gathering magic in their mouth, and in the same time Bixlow reached for his mask, taking it off, revealing his tattooed face. Dark Acature. Absolute shadow, Fried said in serious voice. Magic warped around Fried's body as his right eye glowed purple. When magic died down, Fried looked like a monster from children's stories. Fried's upper body became covered in a dark armor, complete with large shoulder pads and a helmet with a menacing appearance. His hair became slicked back and protrudes from the opening in the helmet. You'll regret attacking our guild, Fried said as he and Bixlow charged at Rustyros. We'll see about that. Arc of embodiment. Jet black sword. His hand turned and clawed Black Beast's arm. Let's have fun, Rustyros said as their attacks collided. Bixlow's babies deflected Rusty's attack. Fried jumped over Bixlow and catching silver-haired mage off guard, he fired his spell, Darkness Flare Bomb. Fried created a sphere-like bomb made from dark energy, and just when he was in front of Rustyros he pushed his hand forward, pushing the bomb in Dark Mage's chests. Rustyros was sent flying but was able to get control of his movements as he flipped in air and landed on the ground on his feet, skidding backwards until finally stopping. He growled as he looked down on his burned chest and hole in shirt. That was my favorite shirt, you bastard. You'll pay for the crime you committed, he yelled dramatically. Fried and Bixlow sweat dropped at the mage that was almost crying for his shirt. Arc of embodiment. Hellhounds, he yelled. A second later the ground around Dark Mage cracked, and not long after that 2 tree-headed dogs emerged from the ground. Dogs had reddish fur and their eyes were completely black, no pupils, no iris, just black. They had long and sharp teeth and the foam was coming from their mouth. Long tail trashing madly behind them. What the? Bixlow said, taking step back when one of the heads on one dog barked at him. Say hello to my friends, Rusty said to Fried and Bixlow, then he turned to the dogs. Why don't you go to play with them so you can be better friends? Dogs barked loudly before running at stunned fairy tale mages. As they run, few heads held in excitement. Fried snapped out of his shock first and said, Bixlow, get ready. This snapped Bixlow out as they prepared to fight. Dark Acature. Wings. Fried yelled, and on his backs appeared wings as he avoided just in time to be beaten in half by dogs. Did I forgot to mention that they were the same height as Fried himself? Bixlow jumped over the dog, but he didn't saw dog's tail in time. The tail crashed in his head as he collided with the ground. Bixlow. Fried yelled, worried for his friend. Then, much to his horror, dog turned around and was about to bite off Bixlow's leg. Bixlow didn't have enough time to move out of the way. Thinking fast, Fried yelled, Dark Acature, slay. He drew his sword and swung it at dog's head that was closest to Bixlow. Sword was warped in his runs as he swung it down, creating powerful blast of energy that cut the dog's head. The dog howled in pain as he jumped away from Bixlow. Bixlow not losing his chance get away before the dog got back. He still had 2 heads left after all. Fried smiled under his helmet, but his smile soon disappeared when a voice behind him said, Did you forget about me? Fried turned just in time to stop Rusty's jet black sword with his own sword before it collided with his head. He flew backwards after few seconds and got better look at Rustyros. Said Dark Mage was now also flying on something that looked like wings that was attached to his legs. Rustyros noticed Fried's look and smiled. Do you like it? It's my Pegasus wings. Fried ignored silver-haired man and growled, Darkness Breath. He charged dark energy and molds it into the shape of a highly destructive tornado. Rustyros, looking annoyed because he was ignored, dodged Fried's attack and yelled, Arc of embodiment, jet black sword. His sword extended toward Fried, who dodged it. Fried looked for a second at Bixlow, who was dealing with 2 hellhounds in the moment. One of the remaining heads-on former three-headed now two-headed dog howled and charged at Bixlow, who was trying not to get eaten by the other one. "I could use some help here, man," Bixlow yelled to Freed just as his babies pushed three-headed dog out of Bixlow way just in time for him to dodge clawed paw of other monstrous dog. Freed pushed Rustyros as he yelled back, "I'm a little busy right now." Bixlow glanced at where Freed was and growled, "Shit, Baryon formation." At Bixlow's command, all of his dolls positioned themselves in a pentagonal pattern. A large whirlwind is produced around the formation, and from the latter's hollow center a massive and powerful magical beam is generated, which is subsequently fired towards one of the dogs. The three-headed dog didn't have time to dodge as it was destroyed by powerful beam. The dog fell on the ground with loud thud, before it turned to ashes and disappeared. Bixlow jumped out of the way of remaining dog and panted as he did so. He used too much magic for that last attack. Up in the sky, Freed pushed Rustyros in the tree and jumped down on earth next to Bixlow, who smiled and said, "Took you long enough." Freed smirked behind his helmet. "Shut up." They both charged at the dog, who was getting closer with each passing second. Dark Acature. Freed started. Line formation. Bixlow yelled in the same time as Freed finished his spell with Slay. Two beams of purple light fired the dog and went right trough each of its heads, killing last dog. Rustyros came out of the bushes and growled when he saw his hellhounds defeated. He dusted his clothes and yelled, "This ends now." Freed and Bixlow turned around and stood in fighting stance, getting ready for next attack. Ghosts of Bridia. Rustyros enveloped Freed and Bixlow in a wave of ghost-like entities, which wrap around them. Freed and Bixlow looked around them at ghosts. "You think this'll stop us?" Freed yelled, "I know that. This is my most powerful spell and no one has ever escaped it." Rusty's voice came from all around them. Bixlow and Freed smirked. "I hope you're ready for disappointment." Freed. Dark Acature. Swallow. A powerful wind formed around Freed and Bixlow as ghost-like creatures were sucked away by the wind. Rustyros stared at them in shock. "How?" he asked. "Don't be so surprised," Bixlow yelled, grinning. "This just proves I'm more powerful than you are, since I can do this only when my opponent is weaker than me," Freed explained, and Rusty fell down on the ground. But that's impossible." He stuttered, looking at Freed and Bixlow, and for the first time in his life he felt this uneasy feeling. Could it be? He thought, "Is this fear?" How? he asked after few moments of silence. Freed and Bixlow looked at each other and smiled. "Because we have our family." Freed dispelled his absolute shadow and said calmly, "Dark Acature. Seal," and with that Rustyros froze in the spot with runs on his forehead. Bixlow laughed as he and his babies kicked unmoving man, sending him flying to somewhere in the woods. "High five," Bixlow yelled as he and Freed clapped their hands. Just then Charla and Lily came running toward them. "We heard sound of fight. Is everyone alright?" Lily said. Freed smiled. "Yay, we're fine. That's good to hear," Lily said, smiling. "We should stay here," Charla said, and Lily nodded. They left only few minutes before Rusty Rose came. We're going to try to find Happy, since no one hasn't seen him in a while. Charla and Lily then started working on Levi's and Lizana's wounds while Bixlow and Freed talked about their whole situation. After about 10 minutes a loud scream was heard. "Ah, help me," Lucy said with anime tears running down her face as she ran into the camp. They looked at her confused, but their eyes widened when a giant man came running behind Lucy, trying to catch her. Freed grabbed his sword and swung it at the man. Lucy stopped running when she saw that and yelled at Freed, "Don't let him take your hair." Freed looked at her confused, but when he saw a doll in man's arm he got the idea. What was she talking about? He jumped from the man next to Lucy. "Who's he, by the way?" Bixlow said as he joined the fight. "He's one of the 7 kin. Kane. Something," Lucy said, and Kane stopped. "Hey, I know your name. How come you forgot mine?" Kane yelled, pointing at Lucy. Lucy screamed at him, "How on earth you know my name if I never told you?" Kane then looked at her like she grown second head. After few moments of staring at her he nodded, "You're right. I really don't know your name." "Lucy." Bixlow and Freed sweat dropped. "Not the brightest one, I see," Bixlow said, and sweat dropped again. Others just nodded their heads. "Well now," Freed said as he prepared for another fight. Bixlow ran at the giant and hit him in head, sending him flying. What he didn't saw was that he hit him right where injured members were. Freed glared at him. "How about you watch what you're doing?" Bixlow just laughed nervously. "Haha. I got little carried away." Kane's voice get their attention. Oh. I never put pink-colored hair in Mr. Kersey. Bixlow looked at Lucy whose side he named that doll. Fried and Bixlow nodded. Then they all three realized what he just said. Only one man, or better to say dragon, has pink hair. They looked at each other and palled. They looked at Kian, who already had Natsu's hair in his fingers. He put strand of hair on Mr. Kersey's head and smiled. Look, Mr. Kersey now have pink hair, he said as he straightened his doll, and much to their horror Natsu raised from his bed with his eyes closed. Hey, Lucy, he can't use his magic right? Bixlow stuttered. I don't know, Lucy said, trying not to piss her pants. She truly hoped he wasn't able to do that, but then again, once Natsu wake up he won't be happy about this. They all seemed to have the same thought as they gulped in union. This just become much tougher than it was a second ago. We're so screwed, Bixlow said, and other nodded. What are we going to do? Lucy said as she took step back when Kane jumped in front of them with Natsu's sleeping body closely behind him. I have no idea, Bixlow said, sweating. Fried looked at Lily and Charla, who was standing on their feet not sure what to do. Lily, Charla, you stay there. We'll take care of this while you protect others, Fried said, and Exceeds nodded. Kane's voice brought attention back to him. Now let's see what can I do with this pinky, Kane said excitedly. Others flinched at the name, partially accepting Natsu to open his eyes and tear him apart. It actually seemed as Natsu himself twitched, but his eyes stayed closed. Kane then started moving the doll. Natsu bent his knees, readying himself for jump. Fried and Bixlow stood in fighting stance. Lucy took another step back. I can't fight against him. He's my friend. She thought as panic started taking over. She almost didn't hear Fried's voice. Almost. Lucy. Lucy. Hey, Lucy. Fried yelled, and Lucy jumped in surprise after Fried break her train of thoughts. If you can't do this, go to Lily and Charla, Bixlow yelled, and like on a sign Natsu jumped finally. Lucy shook her head as she jumped out of the way of Natsu's kick. I won't let you two fight alone, she yelled, determination shining harder by the second in her eyes. And as she wanted to prove it, she held out one of her golden keys. Open, gate of the giant crab, Cancer, and with sound of bell Cancer appeared beside her. What can I do for you, my lady Ebby? Cancer asked, and then noticed Natsu, who was fighting Fried and Bixlow. What happened to Mr. Souleater Ebby? He asked as he saw his eyes closed. He's controlled by that fat guy, Lucy said, pointing at Kane, who was busy moving his doll. Can you try cutting that hair that's on the doll, but be careful not to damage the doll? Cancer nodded as he started running toward Kane. With Fried and Bixlow Bixlow just barely dodged Natsu's fist, only to be hit by his leg as he delivered a powerful kick, spinning and elbowing Fried in stomach. Fried and Bixlow jumped as they groaned. We need to fight seriously if we want to win this. That idiot Kane is actually good in this, Bixlow said as he panted. Yes, I know, but it's good that he doesn't have Natsu's speed, Fried said as he ducked to avoid Natsu's flying foot. Bixlow didn't have that much luck since he was paying too much attention to Fried, and when Fried bent down he was once again sent flying by Natsu's foot on his face. Ow, but he still have his strength, Bixlow whined. Natsu then took a rock in his hand and threw it. Fried and Bixlow looked as it passed completely harmlessly beside them. Bixlow laughed. Seems he isn't too good with aiming. They watched as rock flew, and then their eyes widened in surprise as rock hit Cancer, who was only inches away from cutting Natsu's hair of the cursed doll. Shit, Fried said quietly as Cancer disappeared with, I'm sorry, Ebby. Cancer, Lucy yelled worriedly. Kane glared at her. You are making me angry again, he yelled and started running after her. Lucy let out a horrified shriek and started running in circles with Kane and Natsu following her. It was really funny sight actually. Lucy running with tears flying behind her, Kane with his arms in front of himself trying to catch Lucy, and Natsu running with his eyes closed. Fried and Bixlow sweat dropped. It seemed that Kane had enough of running since he threw the first thing he had in his hands at Lucy, and that happened to be Mr. Kersey. Lucy, not noticing that it was Mr. Kersey flying toward her, ducked and the doll fly above her head. Imagine her surprise when Natsu flew above her as well. He'll hit Mira, Fried yelled, and indeed he was flying right toward Mira. Kane was running toward his doll. Fried tried to draw some runs to stop flying Natsu, but he didn't have enough time. Bixlow's babies were flying toward him, but it was all meaningless. Lucy was still sitting on the floor, her eyes wide in shock. Unknown place, unknown POV *. It was raining heavily. I was practicing my kicks and punches on an old tree. I didn't really care that my arms were bleeding from all scratches they had. It didn't bother me though. I was used to it, being trained from my 3rd year like this make me see this as normal. After all, only thing I remember before meeting father is that black cloud of wind that killed my parents. Were those 2 people really my parents? I don't know. I hit one final time that stupid tree and it collapsed to the ground. I glared at tree. A sound of flapping wings made me look up. A giant black dragon landed next to me. I could see he wasn't in good mood. Took you long enough to knock down that tree, my father said. Yay, whatever, I said with pout. Just go at another tree, dragon said with sigh. Fine, Acnologia, I said. HMPF, Acnologia said and turned his head, bastard. I muttered under my breath. What was that, brat? Acnologia said in dangerous tone. I tensed, and nothing. Acnologia glared at me for few seconds before he laid down and closed his eyes waiting for me to finish. Just as I was about to get started I heard him say, on second thought bring me head. I didn't hit the tree and just looked at him. I knew full well what that meant. Whose? I asked hoping not to hear. Humans. I clenched my fist wanting to say something but over the years I learned it's better not. Fine, I said trough clenched teeth, till when? Tomorrow, I sighed. There's small chance in that. I need to get hurried. I bent down and prepared for wave of pain as my bones shifted and wings grew on my back. I bent my knees as I took off and fly toward nearest village. Thinking about that. Maybe I'll find some wizards there. Those stupid humans called some before since I get in that village every now and then. Its population was already halved. I landed near the edge of the village as my wings retreated back in my body. It took me almost half a day to get here and it was already dark now. Pinky, I heard voice in my head and looked around jumping. No one was there so I just glared at my surroundings. I hate when someone calls me Pinky. I walked toward village. It was around 8 o'clock I guessed since there was still people around on streets. I sit on a rock near beginning of village waiting for everyone to get in their homes. I didn't want to raise panic by slicing someone's throat in front of everyone. 4 hours passed by until everyone was in their homes. Sighing I got on my feet and walked casually in the village. There was an old house with some sign on it. Since I just started learning how to read and this people's didn't write on Draconian I guessed it was an inn or something. I walked in and saw owner at the bar cleaning cups. The man looked up after hearing someone coming in and froze in spot. I recognized the old man. I ripped his daughter's head in front of him few months back. Why you? The man said in complete horror watching my cold eyes. Any wizard in here? I asked in a motionless voice. The man didn't seem to know if he should answer or not. I glared daggers at him. Well, I asked letting in my voice some of the irritation I felt. No. He said. I rolled my eyes. Here goes another member of family. I wonder if he had any other family left. I disappeared and reappeared in front of the man crouching on bar and my sensitive nose catching smell of urine indicating that old man just pissed himself. I raised my hand and put it on man's head reading to rip his head. Just before I did that I heard another voice in my head. He'll hit Mira. My eyes widened as everything around me went black. I knew now that that man was part of my dream and remembered that fairy tale was fighting with enemy. Mira. I remembered Wendy, Makarov, me healing his wound. I wasn't that child anymore. I have to wake up. I have to help. Wake up. Wake up. Damn it. Wake up. My eyes shoot open, and I saw that I was flying trough the air with only few seconds before I crashed in Mira. Normal POV * imagine Freed's, Bixlow's and Lucis surprise when Natsu's eyes shot open when Freed said Myra's name. Their eyes widened even more when Natsu was able to flip himself in air and instead of crazing in Mira he hit rock near her with his back. There was sickening sound of something cracking and others already thought that it was Natsu's spine but when Natsu fell on floor revealing cracked rock they had to hold back a sigh. Of course it was rock and not Natsu. Natsu's voice get their attention on him he looked around with his cold dragon eyes. Everyone were just looking at him, even Kane. Mr. Kersey completely forgotten. Who sent me flying toward my Mira? He hissed in low voice. Without a word Lucy, Freed and Bixlow pointed at Kane. Kane seeing this huffed, it's not my fault entirely. They didn't catch Mr. Kersey. Freed and others had to resist sudden urge to facepalm themselves. Mr. Kersey, Natsu asked in a motionless voice. Kane nodded and pointed at doll near Natsu's feet. Natsu looked at it and he saw his pink, it's salmon, hair on the doll. He closed his eyes as his eyebrow twitched. He knew all too well for what the cursed doll was used. He counted to 10 so that he don't blow everything around him. Help someone, then let them take care of you, and this is what happened, he thought irritably. His magic sparked around him every now and then. Natsu bent down and took the doll from the ground. He took his hair out and put doll in his shirt. Kane looked at him horrified. That's mine. Give me back Mr. Kersey, he yelled. Shut up, Natsu growled and everybody shivered. Natsu lit up his hand in his black and red magic and ran at Kane, hitting him in jaw and sending him crashing in tree. Tree cracked and collapsed on ground. Hey, I don't even need to touch the tree to knock it down, he thought with smug smirk that disappeared quickly. He then turned his head at 3 mages and they felt his temperature around them fell suddenly. He glared his famous death glare at them and said, I so gonna kill you once this is over for giving him my hair. He added his demonic voice in so that they get the message. They gulped and nodded quickly. Now let's go back to business. We're up. He collapsed on his knees as he coughed some blood. Natsu. They yelled as they ran toward him but stopped when he held out his hand to stop them. I'm fine. Just some aftereffects from that spell I used. He then looked at Mira. In his cold eyes appeared something that was most likely concern. What happened to her? He asked, still looking at Mira. A guy named Azuma had trapped Lizana and used her to make Mira fight him, Lily said. And then he blew both of them in air with explosions, finished Charla. Natsu's eyes darkened. He knew all too well who Azuma was. He'll pay, Natsu hissed. His eyes glowed red. Others took step back from him. Bixlow, Fried and Lucy could only watch with wide eyes as Natsu's eyes glowed red and scales started covering his body. Rooaarrr. Natsu let out bloodthirsty roar that froze the blood in their veins. The roar was followed by sickening sound of breaking bones and tearing skin as wings, horns and tail erupted from his body. I'll slaughter them all, he hissed in his demonic layered voice. Natsu bent down slightly and then took off, creating strong gust of wind and leaving nothing but small crater on the place where he stood few seconds ago. This is bad, Fried said. Thank you Mr. Obvious, Bixlow said sarcastically. This is no time for jokes. Fried yelled and then looked at the place where Natsu stood few seconds ago. I never seen him this angry. Me neither, Lucy said. They stood there in silence for few seconds but then heard familiar voice of a certain Blue Exceed. Hey, guys, what happened to Natsu? He just flew past me and almost knocked me down. Happy yelled and then saw the camp. Whoa, what happened here? He asked. With Natsu Natsu flew trough the air at breakneck speed. If you saw him now you would only saw a black blur. His scaly framed eyes looking around rapidly while he sniffed the air trying to find Azuma's scent. His eyes widened slightly when he found Azuma's scent as wicked grin split his face. Wait for me, Azuma, I want your head in my hands, he said out loud in sickly sweet voice. With Ultear she was walking trough the forest with Zeref on her back when she heard bloodthirsty roar somewhere on the island. She stopped walking and looked around as cold sweat went down her back. Everything in the forest went quiet, like animals themselves were too afraid of whatever made that sound. What was that? She asked herself. There, Zeref mumbled and Ultear jumped in surprise at sudden sound. What was that? She asked as she glanced at Zeref that was still on her back. He was still unconscious and that was good. Brother, Zeref said again and Ultear's eye widened when she heard that. That roar came from his brother. She thought with wide eyes as she started running trough the forest. With Natsu he flew between trees with grace that should be impossible with speed he was currently going. Crazy look never leaving his eyes. Then suddenly his nose caught one more scent. His eyes widened at smell of dead trees, grass and blood. He stopped flapping his wings and landed on the ground with his fist on the ground, cracking it in the process. It's him, Natsu yelled in anger as he turned his head to where he sensed that foul scent. He growled in frustration. Azuma was on another side of the island. How is he supposed to get to Azuma and Zeref in the same time? He started growling in frustration. Damn you, AZUMAROOOAAARRRR. This time he gave magic to his roar as a strong torrent of chaos energy consumed nearby trees. He looked around with red eyes. He couldn't think straight. Anger overwhelmed him. He was about to unleash his anger in another, Chaos Dragon's roar, but stopped when he sensed another familiar scent of strawberries near Azuma. Urza, he thought. He looked toward where Azuma is and then to where Zeref is. I'll have to believe in you for this once, because if you fail, heads will roll. He flapped with his wings and flew toward Zeref's scent that was getting further by each passing second. He looked over his shoulder and sighed. He hated doing this. He wanted to kill that bastard Azuma, but he can't let Zeref get away. He had two choices. First, avenge Mira and help his guild, or second, go after Zeref and leave Grimoire Heart to Fairy Tail. If it was anyone else than Zeref, he wouldn't even thought about it. He would run and kill Azuma without second thought. It didn't take him long to get to the scent considering the speed he was currently going. And once he did, he was surprised to be face to face with purple-haired woman. He looked at her and saw Zeref on her back. Ultear's POV**. I was running as fast as I could, trying to get away from this overwhelming power that was rapidly approaching. There was gust of wind and I found myself in front of a man, no, a demon. He looked at me and then his eyes looked at Zeref. My eyes wide as I took step back from him. He was terrifying. And hot. I slapped myself mentally after that. Where did that came from? Demon's eyes were glowing red with barely contained rage as his black and red magic danced around him. His long, bat-like wings that almost touched the ground attached firmly to his back. His tail that was covered with black scales and red lines waving behind him, slightly like when predator watches its prey. His arms and legs that were like rear legs of the dragon were covered with black and red scales. His glowing dragon-like eyes that were framed with red scales watched my every move. On his head stood two long horns that were curved forward. The only thing that stood out of this picture was his spiky pink hair. Then a realization hit me like a hammer. He must be that creature that roared few minutes ago, and that means, he's Zeref's brother. My face twisted in crazy grin. I'll have both of them. What a coincidence. And I was just looking for you, I said happily. Demon raised his eyebrow. You were looking for me? I couldn't help but shiver at coldness in his voice. I nodded. Yes, you see, I came here for Zeref, but then I found out something interesting and decided that I'll take you with me as well. And how do you plan to do that? He asked as his wings twitched slightly. Oh, I thought it was pretty obvious. I plan to defeat you, I said in happy tone. Demon's eyes flashed dangerously as he looked me directly in eyes. You humans are pitiful, I smiled and took my fighting stance. We'll see who's pitiful when I'm done with you. He shook his head and said, you poor fool. I just smirked, thinking that this'll be easy. Oh, if I just knew how wrong I was. My eyes widened when he disappeared. I looked around myself and quickly threw Zeref aside, making trees grow around him in case he wakes up. The second I did that, there was knee in my stomach that sent me flying trough the air. I closed my eyes as I coughed some blood and waited to hit the earth, but to my surprise and horror, something captured me few millimeters from the ground. I opened my eyes only to see my face few inches from Demon's. He swung his arm upward, sending me flying once again. He jumped after me before I could react. He clasped his hands together and hit me in head, hammering me directly in ground. As I collided with the ground, only thing I could do was grunt in pain as ground around me cracked like spiderweb. I weakly stood up, grunting in pain. My whole body hurt from just 2 punches. I looked up and saw him still in the air, flying with his wings, looking down on me with the same cold face. Growling, I started gathering my magic. How dare this trash look down on me? I raised my eyes and yelled in fury, how dare you look down on me? Flash forward, the tree erupted from the ground and I was standing on top of it, getting nearer that damn demon. Normal POV** Natsu looked in surprise as this woman used Arc of Time trying to get near him. He didn't show it, but he actually had fun right now. That woman is truly amusing. He dodged the tree branch woman sent at him and said, what is your name? She glared at him and an orb appeared in her arm. Why would you care? She growled at him. Natsu couldn't help but smirk at woman's miserable attempt to hit him with that flying orb. Partly because of tradition and partly because I really want to know, he replied. Ultear jumped in the air as tree branch quickly grew beneath her legs while she ran straight at me with her head cocked back, ready to punch him. Like that would ever work. He decided that instead of dodging her fist, he caught it and flipped her in the air before sending her flying toward the earth. He watched for few seconds as she flew toward the earth before he stopped moving his wings and let himself fall after her. He warped his wings around his body to become even faster. He flew past her as she watched him fall with wide eyes. He opened his wings few meters from the ground, successfully slowing himself down and landing nicely while catching Ultear for her collar like cats do to their kittens. He turned her head toward him forcefully with his other hand and smirked as she tried to bit his fingers. After that proved to be unsuccessful, she pulled out her sword and tried to pierce him. He let go of her face but not her collar, and caught the blade with his bare hand, not bothering that it started bleeding when he took her sword away and threw it aside. All this time looking at her with amusement. So the sword didn't work either. There is only one thing left. She took a deep breath and started trashing around, waving her hands and legs, screaming like little girl. Let me go, 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 let me she said at the end when Natsu roughly dropped her on the ground. She was about to yell at him when he warped his hand around her neck and lifted her from the ground. She said as she tried to get her orb with her magic. The orb multiplied and she smirked as it came down toward Natsu. Baka. She heard him mutter as spread his wings sharply, successfully making orb fly in different directions since the gust of wind was too powerful. Now, let's stop playing around, he hissed suddenly, and his hand warped itself in dark magic. Ultear eyes widened in surprise at sudden burning sensation on her neck. Ah, she screamed. After a minute of her screaming, Natsu stopped. Who are you? Why would I tell anything to you? She spat in his face. He narrowed his eyes and lit his hand once again. Okay. My name is Ultear Milkovich. Natsu smiled wickedly as he stopped sending magic in his arm that was still firmly warped around her neck. See, it wasn't that bad, he said in sickly sweet voice. You bastard, she said as she glared at him. To her surprise, he laughed. You know what, I like you, he said in amused voice. Was the only thing she could say as he let her go and put her down on the ground. My name is Natsu Souleater, son of Dragon King Acnologia Chaos Dragon, he said and smirked as her jaw touched the floor. Son of Acnologia? She asked in disbelief. He nodded as smirk disappeared from his face, leaving it emotionless again. Her eyes widened even more, if that was even possible, when he warped himself in magic. And Chaos Dragon, he added in amused voice as his wings, tail and horns disappeared, leaving him like any normal person. Only his dragon-like eyes stayed, but they weren't glowing red anymore. Now since you're the enemy, he said emotionless once again, and before she could say anything else he hit her in her head, knocking her out. He watched her emotionless as she collapsed to the ground and picked her up, putting her on his back. He looked around to where he last saw Zeref, only for his eyes to narrow in frustration. The trees that bounded Zeref were broken and there was no trace of him. He let him get away again. He roared in frustration, scaring away the birds that were on island. He was growling all the way as he walked back toward the camp, muttering to himself, idiot. I'm such an idiot. Baka. He glanced behind to see Ultear still knocked out inside. There was something familiar about her. He felt it before, but where? In camp. Mira stirred in her bed. Back with Natsu. He looked at the sky and sniffed the air. I see. Good job, Urza, he said as he smiled and continued to walking. Maybe I could get Master to let Ultear join the guild once this is over, he thought out loud. His eyes then darkened suddenly, and once I get her to the camp, Hades's head will be in my hands. Let's get you another head, father, just like you thought me. As painful as it can, he said as sadistic grin split his face once again. On ship of Grimoire Heart. Master Hades shivered slightly as he looked through the window toward the forest on Tenro Island. He couldn't get rid of this bad feeling he had. Something will happen. Something big, and it won't be good. Above the clouds. Dark shadow flew above the clouds as an ear-splitting roar rocked the sky. I'm coming, brat. Be ready. Natsu walked slowly back toward the camp, occasionally sniffing the air to check his surroundings. It was very quiet. He scared the birds away while he fought Ultear, who was still sleeping on his back. All members of Fairy Tail and Grimoire Heart were several kilometers away. Wind wasn't blowing and he himself was walking without making any sound. All in all, peace and quiet, with Ultear's soft breathing on his ear. Ultear's paw. As I could feel my consciousness returning, I became aware that I was on something cold and that I was carried somewhere. It felt so good and nice. I would most likely fall back to sleep if I didn't remember what happened before I lost my consciousness. My eyes shoot open and I was greeted with pink-haired head. I stare at it for few seconds and then I realized who that hair belongs. My eyes grew even bigger, if that was possible, and then, ah, I shrieked. Normal paw. A sudden, ah, broke the silence. Natsu's head stormed unbearable pain as he let go of Ultear and covered his ears. When he let go of Ultear and she realized she was falling, she tried to catch on something, and that something, or better to say someone, happened to be Natsu. She pulled Natsu down with her as they both fall on the ground, resulting with Natsu on top of her with his head between her breasts, still covering his ears, but now his eyes were wide in shock as well. They stayed like that for few seconds, with Ultear's face matching Urza's hair, before she pushed him of her and slapping him with all power she could muster, yelling, "Pervert!" Natsu, still in complete shock, fell on the floor looking at Ultear with her handprint on his face shining bright red. He, however, quickly regained his composure and got up, dusting his pants. Ultear was still sitting on the floor with her arms crossed, her cheeks puffed and face red in embarrassment. "Who are you calling pervert?" Natsu asked after few more seconds. "You're the one that pulled me down." "Well, you shouldn't have let me go," she said, standing up and pointing accusing finger on him. "You started screaming in my ear. It was either that or become deaf," he replied. Ultear opened her mouth to protest, but Natsu started glaring daggers at her, so she quickly shut them up. They stood there for few more seconds in silence, looking each other in the eyes. Ultear after short time looked away, unable to look at Natsu's cold, dragon eyes. "Why didn't you kill me?" she muttered, looking at her feet. Natsu raised his eyebrow. "Why would I? I heard rumors that you killed every opponent you faced," she said. Natsu rolled his eyes. "I didn't kill all of them," and then thought, "just majority." Ultear looked at him and said, "Oh. Then, why didn't you kill me? I told you that before," he said, and Ultear looked at him confused. "I like you and you amuse me." Ultear blushed and looked away again. "Let's go," Natsu said after few moments of silence. Ultear's head jerked up. "Where?" "To the camp," Natsu said as he started walking with his hands in pockets. "I have no intention of going to your guild." "Oh, that you could give me to the council." "Who said anything about the council?" Natsu asked, not bothering to stop or turning toward her. If he did, he would have saw Ultear looking at him like fish. She watched Natsu as he kept walking and then shouted, "Hey! Wait up!" and ran after him to catch up. They walked in silence for few seconds, and then Natsu asked her, "Why do Grimoire Heart want Zeref?" Ultear looked at him and then in front of herself. "They want to rule a world that Master Hades called the ultimate magic world, where the 90% of the world's humans use magic." Natsu nodded and then asked, "Why do you want Zeref?" Ultear's eyes widened as she looked Natsu in the eyes. "I can see that you were not planning to surrender him to your guild," he said, looking in front of himself as he kept walking. Ultear said and looked at the ground. "I wanted happiness." Natsu stopped walking and looked at her. Ultear stopped but didn't dare to look at him. Natsu chuckled suddenly and started walking, shaking his head like he heard some old joke. Ultear glared at him. "What?" she hissed. "You should have just go to another guild," Natsu said with small smirk. "Huh, what are you saying?" Ultear asked, confused. "I'm saying that it's not Zeref who will bring you happiness. It's your family." At that, Ultear glared at him and said in angry tone, "My mother left me, and besides, what do you know about family?" Natsu's smirk disappeared. They walked in silence for few minutes. Then Natsu spoke again. "You don't have to be blood related. I have younger sister Wendy, grandfather Makarov, my mate Mira Jane, and my father Acnologia. Even though I don't care about many people in fairy tale, or many people in general, I will protect those I care about with everything I have. You were just blind, not seeing what was right in front of you." Ultear looked at Natsu with wide eyes. She heard so many stories about how ruthless and cold he was. Were all those rumors just that, rumors? She then realized what was he trying to say. "Merity," Ultear thought. "Why are you taking me to your guild if you don't plan to take me to the council?" Ultear asked. "I want to show you the real happiness," Natsu said, and then smirked at Ultear's face. They didn't say a word the rest of the way. It took them 10 more minutes to get back to the camp. Natsu walked first out of the bushes, making everyone look at him with trace of fear in their eyes. That didn't go unnoticed by Natsu and Ultear, who walked to the camp few seconds after Natsu. Well, you couldn't blame them due to the rage Natsu showed earlier. Those eyes, however, quickly vanished when they saw Ultear walking behind Natsu. They watched in shock as Natsu scanned through the camp to see who was here. In the camp were Urza, Gray, Lucy, Wendy, who was now awake much to his relief, Exceeds, some pink-haired girl he didn't recognize, Mira, who was still asleep, Gajiel, Elfman and Evergreen that were still in bed, and Bixlow and Freed, who were sitting next to Urza talking about everything that happened. Natsu. Wendy cried out in worried but happy tone. She ran toward him and hugged him firmly. Natsu's emotionless face turned into a gentle smile as he patted Wendy's head. I see you're feeling much better, Natsu said in soft voice that seemed like it wasn't even his. Yup, Wendy said as she released Natsu and grinned at him. She then looked at Ultear. Who's she? Natsu opened his mouth to answer but was interrupted by pink-haired girl that shouted, You Ultear. Ultear's head jerked up as she looked at pink-haired girl, Merity. Merity ran toward Ultear and asked, Are you alright? I'm fine, Ultear said with smile. How did you get here? She asked Merity. Gray and I fought and he won so he took me here, Merity said as she pointed at Gray that was looking at Ultear with wide eyes. Ultear looked up and saw Gray. She glared at him, shocking the few members. Why you look just like her, Gray said. Ultear just kept glaring. You two know each other? Lucy asked. I'm daughter of his dear teacher, Ultear said in Urza. Wendy and Lucy looked at Gray in shock. He told them that she was dead. I thought you were dead, Gray said. I'm sure my mother would have liked that, Ultear scoffed. Gray clenched his fists and yelled, You don't know anything about how your mother felt. She cried almost every day because she thought you were dead. Ultear would have said something but Natsu cut her off. I would really appreciate if you two would shut up. After that no one dared to say anything. Good. Now, we have more pressing matters that needs to be taken care of, Natsu said in monotone voice. Others nodded. We need to take care of Grimoire Heart. Natsu continued. We will split you in two groups. One will go to fight Hades and others will stay here and defend injured members in case there is still some enemy left on this island. He then turned and glared daggers at Freed, Bixlow and Lucy, who started sweating. And when I say defend, I expect you to do better job than you did in the past. Freed, Bixlow and Lucy nodded and yelled in union, Hi. Knowing full well what was he talking about. Now, those that will come with me and fight against Hades are Urza. He pointed at her and she immediately stood up and nodded. Gray stood up a little shocked. Lucy, he said and was answered with, Me. His glare quickly made her stood up. Exceeds, Panther Lily nodded and transformed in his battle form. Charla and Happy stood up with determined expressions. And, Natsu was about to say Freed but Wendy was quicker. I'll go too, Natsu looked at her with a motionless face. No, he deadpanned. Yes, I want to help, she yelled. It's too dangerous, Natsu said firmly. You think I care, Wendy replied. Natsu looked at her with well-hidden shock. Fine, he said after few seconds. And Wendy, he finished and Wendy cheered silently. Let's go, Natsu said and then added, make sure that she stay here, he said pointing at Ultear who just glared daggers at him. And with that Lucy, Urza, Gray, Exceeds, Wendy and Natsu walked off the forest with Natsu leading them. Natsu, who was on the front, would occasionally sniff the air here and there and then they would turn left or right. Soon enough they found themselves in front of the big airship with big Grimoire Heart sign on its front. Let's go, Natsu said and kept walking toward ship. Exceeds, you try to find anything that looks like engine that runs this thing, Natsu said, to which Exceeds nodded with Happy's, aye sir, and flew to the ship. We will go in and fight Hades, Natsu said. Hi. Natsu then walked to the doors of the ship and blasted the doors along with half of the wall that was there. Other sweat dropped. Dragon is on your doors, Hades. It's just a matter of time before I stain my hands with your blood, Natsu said in sing-song voice that made others shiver. I wouldn't want to be in Hades' shoes now, Gary said to Lucy as they watched Natsu walking in with crazy look in his eyes and mad grin plastered on his face. Come on you two, Wendy said. She was almost in the ship already and Natsu was nowhere to be seen. They walked in and saw Natsu walking trough the hall full of soldiers like there was no one in. Those poor fowls that dared to attack him were quickly sent flying with some of their limbs missing or broken. It didn't take them too long to see giant doors that were obviously where Hades was. Natsu sent last guard trough the doors and much to his amusement saw Hades smiling. Knock, knock, Natsu said still in that sickly sweet voice. Sorry to barge in like this. Hades laughed. You stupid little boy. Natsu just tilted his head to the side looking even creepier and scarier than before. Who, me? He asked innocently. His face suddenly turned emotionless. Let me show you who is the idiot here, don't make me laugh, Hades said. Hades pointed his finger at Natsu, putting his fingers in gun-like position and fired. Hades's grin widened as he watched his magic bullet fly toward Natsu, who didn't even blink. His joy didn't last long when Natsu simply slapped his bullet away like it was nothing. "How did you?" Hades asked, shocked. "That bullet should have go right trough him." He then noticed something that made his eyes widen. The arm that boy used to slap away his magic was now covered in black scales that rapidly fell off, turning into ashes, leaving boy's naturally pale skin. Natsu looked at Hades with emotionless eyes. "What's your name, boy?" Hades asked with smirk. "I am Natsu Souleater, son of Chaos Dragon King and King of the Dragons Acnologia. I am Chaos Dragon Prince and your executioner," Natsu said. Emotionless. Hades laughed. "You really think you can kill me? Don't be so naive, you brat." Hades pointed his finger at someone beside Natsu. Natsu had only enough time to widen his eyes before Hades said, "Perish." Wendy looked at Natsu in alarm and cried out, "Brother!" with her hand stretched out trying to get a hold on Natsu's outstretched hand, but it was too late. Just few inches before she touched Natsu's hand, she disappeared, leaving only her clothes. "Wendy!" Everyone cried out in shock and disbelief. Natsu remained quiet as he watched with wide eyes at empty space where Wendy stood few seconds ago. Hades started laughing. Only her clothes remained. Hilariously, Natsu clenched his fist so hard that blood started trickling down his fist. "Are you going to cry, my prince?" Hades asked in mocking concern. Gray and Lucy were too occupied at the fact that Wendy was gone, but Urza could feel and see it. Natsu's magic. It felt like it's going to explode. "Lucy, Gray, take cover," Urza yelled just in time as Natsu's magical pressure exploded. Lucy, Gray and Urza threw themselves on the floor and watched with wide eyes as Natsu's magical pressure made even walls crack. Their attention was driven away when they heard a small thud and looked up. "Horologium," Lucy cried in surprise. Three mages then saw what was inside. "Wendy," Urza shouted and ran toward the clock, stumbling here and there because of the pressure Natsu was emitting. "I'm fine," says she, Horologium said. "Only, my clothes is missing," she adds, embarrassed. Horologium added. "Can you give her some clothes from Celestial World?" Lucy asked from her spot. Horologium nodded. With Hades *, Hades watched surprised when energy around Natsu exploded. It soon transformed into a tornado of chaos energy that destroyed half of the ceiling. He could barely saw Natsu's outline, but he could say without a problem that it was changing. And those red eyes that glowed, thick layer of magic energy didn't help. Better to kill him now before he transforms completely, Hades thought. "Take this," Hades yelled as he outstretched his hands forwards and from them shoot silver chains. The chains flew black and red energy toward Natsu's outline and warped themselves around something. The tornado died down instantly, but instead of Natsu being in the chains like Hades thought, he saw Natsu holding both chains with his left hand. Natsu himself looked quite different. His face was on the sides covered with black scales with his eyes framed in red ones. From his pink hair grew two long black horns that were curved forward. 2 meters long tail twitched on the wind that was now in the room due to the hole on the walls and ceiling. 2 black bat-like wings that almost touched the floor were attached to his back. His legs were now like hind legs of the dragon, covered with black scales and red lines. His hands were also covered in black and red scales with his nails extended in long, sharp claws. His eyes were glowing red with barely contained anger. Hades smirked. Well, what do we have here? Your end?" Hades looked at Natsu with crazy look in his eyes. "Such power. Such evil. If only he was in Grimoire Heart. We would be unstoppable. I'll make him mine." Hades shoot himself at Natsu, who followed his example. Hades extended his arm aiming to hit Natsu in head, but Natsu ducked and warped his tail around Hades's wrist, throwing Hades over his head. Hades however quickly flipped in the air and landed on his feet with one knee on the ground. He fired his magic bullet from his finger right at Natsu's leg, but Natsu saw it and sent the bullet flying with his wing. Hades growled at that and shoot more chains at Natsu. Natsu narrowed his eyes as he caught chains again and pulled them along with Hades. Hades, not expecting Natsu to do that, flew toward Natsu. Natsu raised his knee and kicked Hades right into stomach, sending him flying. Hades shoot another chain, but this time he warped them around the pillar, so instead of crashing in the floor he used his momentum and sent himself flying right back at Natsu, who shielded himself from Hades's fist with warping his wings around himself. He was still pushed back though, and Hades used that as time to fire even more magic bullets, but this time he used more magic and they were stronger. Natsu wasn't prepared for so many of them. Right after Hades's fist left his wing and the few of the bullets pierced thin leather on his bat-like wings, hitting him in his right arm and shoulder. Roaring in frustration, Natsu unleashed powerful roar at Hades, who just had enough time to dodge it, but he didn't go unscathed as it tore his shirt and made deep gash on his shoulder. Hades jumped back again but quickly ducked as Urza's sword sliced the air where his neck once were. As he ducked, he shifted his weight on his hands and threw his leg at Urza, who was sent flying. Urza was however caught by Gary, who made his ice cannon and fired ice ball at Hades, who destroyed it with his magic bullet. What he didn't expected was to hear Wendy's voice yelling, "Sky Dragon's roar." Hades only had enough time to put his arms in front of himself as the roar hit him head on. It was pure luck that he wasn't hit with one of Natsu, cause it would definitely do much more damage than few scratches this one made. Growling in frustration, Hades yelled, "Formula 100. Natsu's red eyes widened as he roared, "Chaotic Void." He disappeared and reappeared right in front of Wendy, who was the target of the spell, and warped his wings and tail around her, shielding her from explosion that was heard trough whole Tenro Island. "Natsu, Wendy," Urza yelled and launched herself at Hades while crying out, "Requip Purgatory Armor." Just as she was above Hades, his sword appeared in her arms and she swung it down at Hades, who used his chains and throw rock above himself, successfully avoiding Urza's sword. Urza looked at where Natsu and Wendy were a few moments ago and almost puked when she saw Natsu's wings torn with the bones of the wings sticking out. Wendy, who was under Natsu, looked at him with worried expression. "And Natsu?" Natsu grinned as he looked down on her. Blood trickling down his chin. "Seems I still didn't fully recover after that spell I used to save Master," he said. "Ha ha ha, how pathetic." Hades laughed. He saw Natsu muttering something and then he found himself face to face with Natsu. It wouldn't be that much of a problem if Natsu hasn't already prepared to unleash his roar right in Hades's face. Hades was saved only because he was able to duck his head, so the attack flew right over his head. He wasn't, however, able to avoid Natsu's next attack. Chaos Dragon's Claw. Natsu jumped in the air and brought his leg right on top of Hades's head, nailing him in the ground. Natsu jumped to the side and started chanting, "Dragon Slayer Secret Art. Demon Lord. Oblivion's Fist." Natsu's fist was warped in red energy as he ran at Hades, who just now stood up to be sent flying again with fist on his rib cage. There was sickening sound that clearly meant that at least 5 of his ribs were broken. Hades caught some blood as he stood up. "Not bad," Hades said with smirk as he watched Natsu, who started coughing again. This time even more blood came from Natsu's mouth. "Let's try this again," Hades said as he was about to fire another magic bullet but was interrupted by Taurus's axe slicing the air next to his head. "You little," Hades yelled and fired bullet at Taurus, who disappeared with silent, "I'm sorry Miss Lucy." Taurus. Lucy yelled worriedly after her spirit was hit. "This will keep you quiet," Hades yelled as he fired another bullet at Lucy, hitting her in the leg. "Aw!" Lucy screamed. "Lucy!" Urza and Gray yelled. Wendy quickly ran toward her and started healing her. Hades's attention was quickly drawn back to Natsu after Natsu shouted, "Chaos Dragon's Grip Strike." Hades didn't have enough time to avoid as Natsu's hand grabbed his face and sent him flying with powerful shock wave. Hades flipped in the air and smirked. "Your attacks are not nearly as powerful as before," Natsu growled as he spit some more blood. "He's right, I used too much life force to heal Makarov. I fought with Zancrow and Ultear, and not to mention that I didn't eat almost anything today and had barely any sleep in last few weeks. Let's see how will you handle this." Hades yelled and pointed his fingers at Natsu, and just before he fired he turned in the blink of an eye toward Gray and Urza that were right above him and fired the bullets at them. "No!" Natsu roared as he watched Gary and Urza fall on the ground after bullet went off their stomachs. "Now if we can continue without any interruptions," Hades said. "Chaos Dragon's Roar." Natsu roared but Hades was able to dodge the attack. "Damn it," Natsu cursed. "Piercing bullet," was only thing Hades said before magic bullet went off Natsu's chest, missing his vital organs by sheer luck. "Brother," Wendy yelled on the verge of tears. "You'll join him soon enough," Hades said, not noticing that Natsu was still alive. He sent another bullet at Wendy but once again Natsu said, "Chaotic Void," and the bullet pierced his stomach. He fell in Wendy's arms as she started healing him immediately. "Isn't he bothersome fellow?" Hades said and pointed at Wendy. Wendy shot her eyes, waiting for death to come, thinking, "If only I didn't came here, Natsu wouldn't have to protect me. Why didn't I listen to him when he said I should stay behind?" A loud sound of thunder rang off her head. Her head jerked up and her eyes widened when she saw who was now standing in front of her. Laxus, she said in disbelief. One and only, kiddo, Laxus said as he looked at her and smirked, so the almighty Natsu wasn't able to defeat this old geezer. Shut up, Laxus, Urza said. Is that a way to treat your savior? Laxus asked smirking. What are you even doing here? Gray asked. I came to help you, Laxus Simple replied before he started fighting with Hades. Another dragon slayer, eh? Hades asked smirking as Laxus's roar flew few inches beside his head. You really think you can beat me? Hades asked Laxus after Laxus came rushing at him with his fist cowered in lighting. You're weakling compared to that half-dead prince over there, Hades said pointing with his thumb behind his back to Natsu while dodging Laxus's fists. Who are you calling a weakling? Laxus roared as his leg connects with Hades's head, followed by a punch in the stomach, and then he smashes him in the ground with a second kick on the head. Hades jumped high in the air to barely avoid Laxus's lightning dragon's roar. When Hades landed on the ground he fired another Amaterasu attack those formulas he was using. However, Laxus rapidly emerges from it in his lightning form, reaches Hades back and kicks him. Laxus was surprised to see Hades smirking after that, but he quickly discovered the reason when he saw another Amaterasu circle on the ground right where he was standing. Unable to avoid, Laxus put his arms in front of his face before a large explosion engulfed entire room. As the smoke cleared, others watched with disbelief as Laxus lay down on the ground unconscious. Hades laughed and then put his hand on the eye patch he wore and said, I hope you feel honored. I'll reveal to you my full power if only to erase you. He moved the eye patch only to reveal that his right eye was red. The Devil's Eye, Awakening, the Abyss of Magic. This domain of magic is far beyond any of your wildest imaginations. Hades looked at them. This magic power, Urza thought, it's almost like that of Natsu's demon form when he unleashed his full power. And then she realized something much to her horror, and it's still raising. This is your end, fairy tale, Hades growled. To walk the path of magic, is to sink into the deepest levels of darkness. Hades started gathering magic in his hand. Beyond the depths shining in the deep abyss, is the magic of one, Hades said. As he said this, no one noticed Natsu's eyes open. Now witness its power, Hades said, and then started chanting, from the chapter 4, scripture 12 of the book of Zeref. Hidden magic, the punishers of heaven, Nemesis. As he finished, the ground started cracking and from the ground rose black creatures made entirely of magic. He created demons, Lucy asked in disbelief. Urza looked at her trembling hand. Even I am afraid. I'm scared. I'm so scared, Wendy said quietly, not aware that Natsu heard her. There is nothing to be afraid of, Natsu said quietly, making Wendy and others jump in surprise. Those are not demons, Natsu said, and others looked at him confused. What do you mean? Lucy asked. They are creatures made entirely of the magic of one, Natsu said as those creatures started blending in one. How is that any less concerning? Gray asked. The creatures turned into a beam now that was ready to be fired. Natsu just smirked in response as the beam consumed them. Hades laughed. Goodbye, fairy tale. There was a sudden noise coming from the explosion, but Hades ignored it. Until it happened second time. And this time it didn't stop. That's when Hades realized what was that sound. It was the sound of someone sucking something. He looked at explosion of magic of one in disbelief. Soon the all magic that was in that explosion was sucked away. How is this possible? Hades screamed, looking at fairy tale members that didn't move 1 inch. Well, most of them didn't. Natsu was now standing in front of them. His wounds healing with hissing sound as he wiped his mouth and patted his stomach. It's been a long time since I ate magic, Natsu said, smirking. What? Urza asked in surprise. No way, Wendy said as she realized what just happened. You wanna know what happened, I assume? Natsu asked and chuckled darkly. Let me ask you something first, he said to Hades. What is considered to be wizard soul? Natsu asked, smiling creepily. Magic, Hades said without thinking, while other fairy tale members started to realize what just happened. What is the name of the first and darkest magic? Natsu asked, his smile widening. The magic of one, Hades said with annoyed voice. Why are you asking me this? Wait, one more question. What is my last name? Natsu's smile turned into a grin. Soul Eater. Hades's eyes widened in realization. And every dragon slayer eats some type of magic. No. Natsu said, his grin almost splitting his face in half. You, Hades said in disbelief as he took step back. That's right, my dear Hades. I eat the magic of one, or how we dragons call it, magic of chows, Natsu said with his famous crazy grin splitting his face. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. The next part will be out soon.